In the morning hours of October 13th, 1841, 23 guests were present at what Hartford's elite society would subsequently deem the most scandalous marriage service in Connecticut's annals. Merely moments after taking her initial taste of the ceremonial wine, 19-year-old Bridget O'Sullivan fell to the floor near the altar of Trinity Episcopal Church. Her wedding gown gathered around her violently twitching body as white froth escaped from her lips. The bride's last utterance, clearly audible to those seated in the front pew, was a desperate whisper, "The wine. It burns." What investigators uncovered 3 days later would reveal a meticulously planned homicide so ruthless that the Hartford Courant newspaper chose not to print the complete account. Fearing widespread public fury, the perpetrator was sitting among the attendees, witnessing every painful moment with the cool detachment of someone who had spent months perfecting every detail. Before we continue the account of Elena Petton and the O'Sullivan family tragedy, please consider subscribing to our channel and letting us know in the comments which state or city you are tuning in from. Your participation assists us in illuminating these forgotten American mysteries. The actual events of that autumn morning exposed a tapestry of social prejudice, financial ruin, and obsessive motherly devotion that would permanently alter Hartford's upper class. Hartford in 1841 was a place where traditional New England values intersected with burgeoning industrial expansion. The Connecticut River was traversed by steamboats carrying cargo from New York, while new manufacturing plants sprung up along its banks, their chimneys vying with church spires for dominance of the cityscape. The town's population had surged to nearly 13,000 residents, with Irish immigrants arriving in large numbers to work on the railroads and in the mills that offered prosperity to anyone willing to toil from sunrise to sunset. Among the long-established families of Hartford, the Pettons commanded the utmost respect. Elena Petton, 48 years old and a widow for 6 years, presided over one of the city's most distinguished households from her federal-style mansion on Prospect Street. The 3-story brick residence, with its immaculately kept grounds and wrought iron fencing, was a testament to everything the traditional Connecticut elite embodied: constancy, heritage, and undeniable social eminence. Elena had not been born into wealth. As the child of a moderately successful Hartford tradesman, she had married into a higher social standing when she wed Jonathan Petton in 1815. Jonathan, the inheritor of a shipping fortune accumulated during the War of 1812, had chosen Eleanor for her beauty and sharp intellect rather than her lineage. Their marriage was a love match that caused some scandal within Hartford society. However, Jonathan's success in expanding the family enterprises into insurance and manufacturing had quieted most critics. Their only son, William, was born in 1817 after 3 prior miscarriages, leading Elena to believe he was a divine blessing. She dedicated herself completely to his upbringing, ensuring he received the best education available. William attended Yale College, studying law and literature, and returned to Hartford in 1839 to join his father's business ventures. Tall and scholarly, with his father's dark hair and his mother's intense gray eyes, William Petton was regarded as one of Hartford's most sought-after bachelors. When Jonathan passed away suddenly from apoplexy in 1835, Elena found herself managing an estate valued at roughly $40,000, a fortune that made her one of Connecticut's wealthiest women. She managed the family's financial holdings with a firm grip, determined to protect both their wealth and their social standing. The Petton name provided access across New England, and Eleanor was resolute in maintaining that privilege. The influx of Irish immigrants into Hartford had accelerated throughout the 1830s, driven by famine and poor harvests in Ireland. These newcomers settled in the vicinity of the railroad depot in crowded, unsanitary tenements. They accepted wages that longtime residents considered offensively low, yet their readiness to work for such minimal pay reduced costs for factory owners and fostered resentment among native-born American laborers. Elena observed these demographic shifts with increasing apprehension. At meetings of the Ladies' Aid Society, she listened to grievances about Irish domestic staff who allegedly stole from their employers, about Irish children who fought with well-behaved American youngsters, and about Irish families who packed 10 people into spaces designed for 4. The established families of Hartford began discussing the Irish problem in hushed tones, openly questioning whether these Catholic foreigners could ever truly assimilate as Americans. Against this backdrop of social strife, the O'Sullivan family arrived. In late 1839, Patrick O'Sullivan, a 38-year-old widower, brought his 4 children to Hartford after learning of employment opportunities in the city's rapidly expanding mills. His eldest daughter, Bridget, was 17 upon their arrival. She was a strikingly attractive young woman with auburn hair and vibrant emerald eyes that seemed to capture the light even during Hartford's dreary winter months. Patrick secured a position as a supervisor at Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, where his prior expertise with machinery in Dublin's textile mills proved beneficial. His income allowed him to lease a modest but respectable home on Front Street, located closer to Hartford Center than most Irish families could afford. Bridget secured work as a seamstress in one of the more reputable dress shops on State Street, where her skill with fine fabrics and her relatively unaccented speech made her popular with customers. It was at the Wadsworth Athenaeum's public lecture series that Bridget first met William Peaton. The lecture, given by a visiting Harvard professor on American literature, had attracted Hartford's intellectual elite. Bridget was present because her employer, Mrs. Catherine Hendris, had encouraged her Irish employees to improve themselves through learning and culture. William noticed her instantly, seated in the rear section reserved for the working class. Bridget listened with an intense focus that impressed him. When the speaker invited questions, she raised her hand to inquire about the impact of Irish poetry on American authors, a question so thoughtful and clearly phrased that several people turned to look at her with surprise. Following the lecture, William approached her as she retrieved her wrap. "That was an excellent query concerning Irish literary influence," he said, removing his hat. "I am William Peaton. I don't believe we have been introduced." Bridget's cheeks flushed slightly, but she spoke steadily. "Bridget O'Sullivan. Mr. Peaton, I am pleased to meet you." They walked together towards State Street, engaging in conversation about literature and concepts with a natural rapport that surprised them both. William learned that despite her limited formal schooling, Bridget was an avid reader, having consumed everything from Shakespeare to contemporary American writers. She had borrowed books from a kind priest in Dublin and continued to read whatever she could find in Hartford's circulating libraries. When they reached the intersection where their routes separated, William hesitated. "Miss O'Sullivan, I wonder if you would be interested in attending next week's lecture. It is scheduled to be on American history, and I believe you would find it engaging." Bridget's smile lit up her entire face. "I would enjoy that a great deal, Mr. Peaton." Their romance began discreetly with caution. William understood the social repercussions of his attraction to an Irish working girl, but Bridget's intelligence and charm persuaded him that such concerns were trivial and unworthy of consideration. They met for strolls along the Connecticut River, attended cultural events and lectures, and discovered a mutual understanding that transcended their differing backgrounds. Elena remained oblivious to these events for nearly 6 months. William had always been reserved about his private life, and she presumed his frequent absences from home were due to his commitment to business affairs or social engagements with men of his own social standing. The truth emerged on a warm afternoon in July 1840. Elena had decided to surprise William with a visit to his office at the Peaton Building on State Street, bringing him chilled lemonade and news of an invitation to the governor's summer reception. As she ascended the stairs to the second floor, she overheard voices coming from behind his office door. William's familiar deep voice and a woman's voice she did not recognize. "My mother will never approve of this," William was saying, "but I no longer care about her acceptance, Bridget. My love for you is what truly counts." Eleanor froze where she stood on the landing, grasping the pitcher of lemonade so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "You must consider your family's standing in the community," the woman responded, her voice carrying a faint Irish lilt that sent a chill through Elena. "I don't wish to be the source of conflict between you and your mother, William. She has sacrificed so much for you." "You misunderstand," William asserted firmly. "She has dictated every part of my existence since father passed away. Who I should wed, where I should reside, how I should allocate my time. I am 23 years old and have never once made a significant decision without her sanction. That ends today." Elena flattened herself against the corridor wall, her heart throbbing so loudly she worried they might hear it through the door. "When do you plan to tell her about us?" the woman inquired. "Soon, very soon. I want you to meet her formally as my prospective wife. She will eventually recognize what I see in you. Your sharp mind, your compassion, your fortitude. She will be compelled to accept that I have chosen the woman I wish to share my life with." The noise of a chair dragging across the floor spurred Elena to hasten down the stairs, leaving the lemonade pitcher on the landing. She reached her waiting carriage in a state of near frenzy, commanding her driver to rush her home immediately. During the short trip to Prospect Street, her shock transitioned into a deep-seated fury that made her feel physically ill. An Irish girl, her William, the inheritor of the Peaton wealth and name, was preparing to marry an Irish immigrant. Everything she had strived for, everything she had compromised and schemed to protect, would be annihilated by this person, this nobody, who had likely manipulated her naive son with calculated flattery. That evening, William arrived home for dinner, seeming more content than he had been in months. Elena observed him closely, noticing his quiet humming while carving the roast, the satisfied curve of his lips. She initially wanted to confront him and demand an explanation. However, her years of social manipulation had taught her the importance of patience. She needed to gather information before taking decisive action. "You appear to be in excellent spirits tonight, William," she commented, maintaining a mild tone. "Do I? Well, I suppose I am. I've been considering making some adjustments in my life." "Significant adjustments? Oh, what kind of changes?" William put down his fork and met her gaze directly. "Mother, I've become involved with someone. A young woman of exceptional character and intelligence. I believe she may be the one I wish to marry." Elena's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "How delightful, dear. Is she someone I know?" "No, but I am eager for you to meet her. Her name is Bridget O'Sullivan, and she's—" He paused, seemingly gathering resolve. "She's originally from Ireland. Her family arrived in Hartford 2 years ago." The water glass slipped from Elena's grasp, shattering against her plate. "Oh, how clumsy of me," she said, standing to summon the house staff. "You mentioned O'Sullivan? An Irish family?" "Yes, her father is employed at Colt's factory, and she works at Mrs. Hendriss's dress shop." "Mother, I understand what you might be thinking, but I'm not thinking anything." "William," Eleanor interjected, her voice meticulously controlled, "I am simply surprised. You have never mentioned this young woman before. I wanted to be certain of my feelings before discussing her with you, but I am now certain. I love her, Mother, and I fully intend to ask for her hand in marriage." Eleanor spent the rest of the evening in her private sitting room, walking the length of the Persian rug until she had worn a visible line in the fibers. William's declarations resonated in her mind. He loved this Irish woman and planned to wed her. The consequences hit her like physical blows. Marriage to an Irish immigrant would ruin William's social standing. The most respected families in Hartford would shut their doors to him. His children would bear the burden of their mixed ancestry, neither fully accepted by the established elite nor welcomed by the Irish community, who might see them as betrayers of their heritage. An even more immediate threat was the financial jeopardy. If William married this woman, Elena would forfeit all control over the family's finances. As his wife, the Irish woman would acquire legal rights to the Peaton fortune. She might persuade William to support her extended relatives, donate to Catholic initiatives, or invest in projects that benefited immigrants at the expense of established American interests. Elena had not struggled her way from merchant-class origins to the apex of Hartford society, only to permit an Irish peasant to dismantle everything she had constructed. She would not allow her family's wealth to be squandered on Catholic institutions and Irish family members. She would not tolerate the Peaton name being tarnished by its association with foreign poverty and religious dogma. In the ensuing weeks, Eleanor discreetly investigated the O'Sullivan family. She learned that Patrick O'Sullivan was considered a reliable employee, but had been involved in worker discussions that some regarded as potentially disruptive. Bridget was respected by her employer and clients, but several society matrons secretly gossiped about the impropriety of an Irish girl attempting to rise above her station. Elena also discovered that the O'Sullivans attended services at Holy Trinity Church, the Catholic establishment that many Protestant Hartford residents viewed with suspicion and animosity. The prospect of her future grandchildren being raised as Catholics owing allegiance to a foreign pope horrified her. As the summer concluded and autumn began, William's relationship with Bridget intensified. He escorted her to a few public gatherings, introducing her to his associates with evident pride and affection. Elena observed from a distance as Hartford society reacted with polite astonishment that soon escalated into quiet conjecture. The breaking point arrived in early September when William announced his plan to formally propose. "I have spoken with Mr. O'Sullivan," he informed his mother over breakfast. "He has granted me permission to ask for Bridget's hand. I intend to propose this evening." Elena placed her coffee cup down with deliberate precision. "William, I must implore you to reconsider this decision." "Mother, please allow me to finish. I remained silent about this relationship because I hoped it would naturally conclude. But you are now speaking of marriage, of permanent commitments that will affect not only your life, but the future of our entire family." William's jaw clenched. "What exactly are you trying to say?" "I am saying that marriage requires more than simply personal emotion. It demands social compatibility, shared principles, and common backgrounds. This young woman may be perfectly agreeable, but she originates from a world entirely separate from ours. The differences that currently seem endearing will eventually become sources of friction. Her background is irrelevant to me. It should be relevant. It will matter to your children, who will struggle to find their footing in society. It will matter to your business partners, who expect their associates to uphold specific standards. It will matter to everyone we know." William stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. "I am deeply disappointed in you, Mother. I expected more from someone who married for love herself. Your father and I came from comparable situations. We understood each other's expectations and obligations. This circumstance is completely different. The only distinction is your bigotry toward the Irish." Elena's pretense of control finally fractured. "It is not prejudice, William. It is reality. These individuals are unlike us. They hold differing loyalties, values, and priorities. This girl will transform you, and not favorably." "This discussion is concluded," William stated coldly. "I am going to ask Bridget to marry me tonight, whether or not I have your approval." After he departed, Eleanor sat alone in the dining room for nearly an hour, gazing at her untouched breakfast. The decision was final. William could not be swayed by arguments or threats. He was determined to wed this Irish woman, and when he did, Elena's influence over the family wealth and heritage would be lost forever, unless she acted to prevent it. The engagement of William Peaton to Bridget O'Sullivan was formally announced in the Hartford Courant on September 15, 1840. The short notice, placed in the society column, sparked more conversation than any social news in recent memory. At afternoon teas and men's clubs throughout the city, people debated whether William had lost his mind or had simply been captivated by Irish charm. Elena maintained a display of polite acceptance while inwardly burning with fury. She attended social events where well-meaning acquaintances offered congratulations, coupled with thinly veiled pity. "How very forward-thinking of William," they would remark, their voices carrying subtle hints of scandal. "I'm sure the girl is quite acceptable." The worst moment occurred at a Ladies' Aid Society meeting where Mrs. Harrison Fitzgerald, whose own Irish background was conveniently ignored by Hartford society, made a pointed remark about the necessity of preserving proper marital standards. "Of course, we must show kindness to these immigrant families," she said, casting a meaningful look at Eleanor. "But there are appropriate boundaries that should not be crossed." Elena managed a stiff smile and changed the topic, but the humiliation festered in her chest like corrosive acid. She felt judged, patronized by women who had previously deferred to her social status. The Peaton name, once a key to every door in Connecticut, was becoming associated with whispered gossip and malicious commentary. During this time, Elena began to observe Bridget O'Sullivan with the intense focus of a military strategist studying an adversary's position. She attended public gatherings where the couple appeared, scrutinizing how Bridget carried herself, spoke, and interacted with Hartford's elite. What she saw only intensified her anxiety. Bridget was not the simple Irish peasant Eleanor had expected to find. The young woman possessed an inherent grace that was impossible to teach, an intelligence that shone through her conversations, and a genuine warmth that drew people to her. Even Elena's fiercest critics among the society matrons conceded that the O'Sullivan girl exhibited remarkable composure for someone of her background. More disturbing was the clear depth of William's affection. He looked at Bridget with a devotion Elena had never witnessed from him before. When they walked, he instinctively adjusted his longer stride to match hers. When she spoke, he listened with absolute attention. When others made subtle social insults, he defended her with a fierce protectiveness that uncomfortably reminded Elena of how Jonathan had once defended her against similar slights. The wedding was scheduled for October 13th. William had preferred a small service, but Bridget insisted on inviting both families and their closest friends. "I want everyone we care about to witness our commitment," she told him. "I don't want anyone to believe we are embarrassed by our marriage or attempting to conceal it." Elena recognized that a public wedding would complete her degradation. Every prominent family in Hartford would attend, if only to satisfy their curiosity about the Irish bride. The event would be discussed and analyzed for months, permanently linking the Piton name with social decline. As September gave way to October, Elena's desperation escalated. She contemplated various ways to sabotage the wedding plans. She considered feigning a sudden illness, forcing William to postpone the ceremony to care for her. She thought about trying to bribe Patrick O'Sullivan to retract his consent. She even considered threatening to completely disinherit William. However, each option carried unacceptable risks. William might proceed with the wedding despite her illness or threats. Bribing the father could backfire spectacularly if he disclosed her attempt to the wider public, and disinheriting William would mean permanently losing her influence over him, while guaranteeing that her fortune would eventually go to strangers. The solution presented itself to Elena during a sleepless night in early October. She was going through her late husband's papers, looking for a legal loophole that might grant her continued control over the family assets, when she found Jonathan's correspondence with a New York business associate who specialized in selling rare chemicals for industrial applications. Among the letters was a detailed discussion of several compounds used in manufacturing processes, including their effects on human health if handled improperly. One letter specifically mentioned arsenic oxide, commonly used in textile manufacturing and available through legitimate commercial channels. Jonathan had been exploring its use in a potential fabric treatment process, but had ultimately decided against the investment due to safety concerns. The letter contained specific data regarding the compound's characteristics: its appearance as a white crystalline powder that easily dissolved in liquids, its flavor, which was practically undetectable when mixed with robust tastes, and its effects, which involved a rapid onset of symptoms that mimicked various common diseases. Crucially, the correspondent pointed out that arsenic oxide was challenging to identify without advanced chemical analysis, a procedure rarely undertaken in cases of sudden health crises. Elena reviewed the letter 3 times, her heart accelerating as the implications became evident. This was a method to obstruct William's marriage in a way that would seem entirely natural, a tragedy, yet unavoidable. A swift illness afflicting the bride during the wedding ceremony would be shocking, but not unheard of. Young women occasionally collapsed from the intensity and pressure of their wedding day, particularly those from less privileged backgrounds who might be overwhelmed by the formality of the event. The strategy materialized with alarming precision. Elena would need to acquire the arsenic oxide through her late husband's commercial contacts. Claiming she was continuing his research into industrial applications, she would need to identify an opportunity to administer it during the wedding service when all focus was on the couple, and she had to ensure her own conduct appeared perfectly normal, like a worried mother-in-law witnessing a disaster. On October 8th, 5 days before the wedding, Elena traveled to the offices of Hartwell Chemical Supply in New York City. She took the early morning train, dressed in her most reputable traveling attire and carrying Jonathan's business correspondence as authentication. Mr. Hartwell, a slender man with anxious hands and wire-rimmed glasses, spoke of Jonathan with respect. "A prudent businessman," he told Eleanor, "always concerned with safety and correct procedures." "How may I be of assistance, Mrs. Peaton?" Elena stated that she was finalizing her late husband's affairs and wished to complete his research into textile treatment methods. She presented Jonathan's letters and discussed the proposed uses with technical knowledge, having spent days studying the specific details. "Arsenic oxide," Hartwell confirmed, checking his documents. "Your husband was exploring its application for fabric preservation. Are you planning to go ahead with the investment?" I am still assessing the commercial viability, Elena replied calmly. But I would like to conduct some initial experiments to better understand the compound's characteristics. Could you provide a small sample for laboratory use? Hartwell agreed and returned from his storeroom with a glass vial holding approximately 2 ounces of the white powder. This should be sufficient for your testing purposes. Please adhere to all safety warnings. The compound is extremely toxic if swallowed or breathed in. Elena paid in cash and carefully placed the vial into her handbag. During the return train journey to Hartford, she held her purse close, keenly aware of its lethal contents. She felt no guilt, only a stern sense of satisfaction at having taken definitive action to protect her family's future. The remaining days were consumed by wedding preparations. Bridget had sought Elena's assistance in planning the reception, a gesture of inclusion that Elena found both surprisingly moving and infuriating. The young woman clearly hoped to earn her future mother-in-law's approval through respectful attention and inclusive actions. I want you to feel that this is your celebration too, Mrs. Peaton, Bridget said as they reviewed the menu for the wedding breakfast. William speaks of you with such respect and affection. I hope that one day you might feel the same fondness for me. Eleanor managed to smile and nod appropriately, all the while precisely calculating the quantity of arsenic oxide needed to guarantee a swift but outwardly natural death. Too little might only cause sickness without achieving her goal. Too much might produce obvious symptoms that would arouse suspicion. Based on Jonathan's letters and her own investigation into medical books obtained from Hartford's library, Elena concluded that roughly half a teaspoon of the powder dissolved in wine would be adequate. The effects would manifest within minutes and accelerate rapidly, resembling the consequences of extreme anxiety or cardiac arrest. On the morning of October 13th, Elena woke before dawn with a distinct sense of resolve she hadn't experienced in months. Every element of the plan had been reviewed in her mind numerous times. She knew exactly when and how she would execute the action, and this certainty gave her grim determination. The marriage ceremony was scheduled for 11 hung at Trinity Episcopal Church, followed by a reception at the Peaton Mansion. Elena had volunteered to supervise the refreshment arrangements, a responsibility that granted her unrestricted access to the ceremonial wine that would be shared by the bride and groom during the blessing. She meticulously dressed in her finest dark blue silk dress, adding the pearl necklace Jonathan had given her on their own wedding day. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman of composed dignity, every inch the respected Hartford matriarch attending her son's wedding. No one looking at her would suspect the deadly objective driving her every deliberate move. The arsenic oxide was concealed within a small silk sachet, sewn into the inner pocket of her dress. The powder had been carefully weighed and prepared the previous night, ready to be dissolved in the wine at the critical moment. Elena had practiced the motion dozens of times, ensuring she could empty the sachet's contents quickly and naturally while appearing to adjust the wine service. At 9 a.m., Elena arrived at Trinity Church to oversee the final preparations. The Gothic Revival structure, with its towering spire and colorful windows, was adorned with autumn flowers and ribbons in gold and burgundy hues. Bridget's modest budget had not permitted extravagant decorations, but the simple displays possessed a quiet elegance that even Elena reluctantly appreciated. Father Matthews, the elderly Episcopal priest who would perform the ceremony, greeted Elena with courteous warmth. Mrs. Peaton, how wonderful to see you. I understand you have been crucial in organizing today's celebration. It's my sincere pleasure, Father, Elena replied smoothly. This is such a happy occasion for our family. She moved efficiently through the church, checking floral arrangements and supervising the positioning of chairs for the reception. Her main focus, however, was the communion table where the ceremonial wine would be placed. The heavy silver chalice, a wedding gift from Eleanor to the couple, sat prepared for the blessing that would follow the exchange of vows. The wine itself was kept in the church vestry, with the other refreshments to be served after the ceremony. Elena had specifically requested that a bottle of their best French vintage be opened for the event, explaining to Father Matthews that she wanted William and Bridget to begin their life together, with the finest of everything. At 10:30, the first attendees began to arrive. Elena positioned herself near the church entrance, greeting each person with impeccable social grace. She observed Patrick O'Sullivan guiding his 3 younger children to their pews, noting the man had clearly spent a substantial sum on new attire for the event. His evident pride in his daughter's marriage to a Peaton reignited Elena's fury. Members of Hartford's high society arrived in luxurious carriages, their expressions meticulously neutral as they surveyed the mix of social classes among the guests. Elena noted their subtle reactions, the polite nods to the Irish families while maintaining a clear distance. The social dynamics she had anticipated were unfolding exactly as she expected. William arrived at 10:45, accompanied by his friend Charles Whitman, who was serving as his best man. Elena felt a surge of genuine affection as she watched her son nervously straighten his cravat and speak quietly with Father Matthews about the ceremony's schedule. He appeared handsome and delighted, blissfully unaware that his mother was about to rescue him from the worst mistake of his life. Precisely at 11 wow, the church bells began to ring and Bridget appeared at the back of the nave. Eleanor caught her breath despite herself. The young woman was truly beautiful, her auburn hair styled elegantly, complementing the simple but perfectly tailored white dress she had sewn herself. She carried a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, and her face shone with a happiness that seemed to illuminate the entire church. Patrick O'Sullivan walked proudly beside his daughter, his hand resting gently on her arm. As they proceeded down the aisle, Eleanor observed how many of the guests smiled instinctively at the sight of the radiant bride. Even some of Hartford's most socially rigid matrons appeared moved by Bridget's obvious joy and grace. The ceremony proceeded with traditional Episcopal gravity. Father Matthews spoke about the sacred nature of marriage, emphasizing mutual respect and devotion, and the blessings that awaited couples who built their union on strong spiritual foundations. William and Bridget exchanged their vows in clear, steady voices, their eyes fixed solely on each other. Elena watched from the front pew, her hand resting over the concealed sachet of poison. Soon she reassured herself. Very soon this disgrace would be over, and William would be free to form a suitable marriage with someone from his own background and class. Following the exchange of rings, Father Matthews approached the communion table to begin the blessing of the wine. This was Elena's crucial moment. She rose from her seat with practiced elegance and moved toward the altar, ostensibly to help with the ceremonial service as the mother of the groom. "Allow me to assist with preparing the wine, Father," she said softly, positioning herself beside the silver chalice. The priest nodded gratefully and turned to address the congregation about the significance of sharing wine as a symbol of the couple's new partnership. While he spoke, Elena's fingers located the sachet in her dress pocket. With movements refined through countless practice sessions, she emptied the white powder into the chalice and used a small silver spoon to stir it gently into the deep red wine. The arsenic oxide dissolved completely, leaving no evidence of its presence. The wine retained its rich color and would taste no different, at least not to someone drinking it amidst the intense emotion of their wedding day. Father Matthews finished his remarks and lifted the chalice ceremonially. "William and Bridget, please come forward to share the wine of commitment, symbolizing your promise to support each other through all of life's happiness and difficulties." Elena returned to her seat, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared others could hear it. William and Bridget approached the communion table, their hands linked and their faces beaming with happiness. Everything was progressing exactly as planned. Father Matthews first offered the chalice to William, who took a small sip and handed it to his bride. Bridget accepted the chalice with both hands, smiled lovingly at her new husband, and brought the wine to her lips. Elena watched with chilling fascination as Bridget drank deeply from the poisoned chalice. The young woman's face expressed nothing but happiness and gratitude as she finished the ceremonial sip and returned the cup to Father Matthews. The lethal dose had been consumed. Now it was simply a matter of waiting for the arsenic to take effect. The wedding party proceeded from the altar to the warm applause of the assembled guests. Elena joined the receiving line at the church entrance, accepting congratulations and kind words about the beautiful service with a mechanical politeness. Her entire focus was fixed on Bridget, monitoring for the first indications that the poison was beginning its work. According to Elena's research, arsenic oxide typically started to affect its victims within 15 to 30 minutes of ingestion. The initial symptoms would be subtle, perhaps a slight pallor, some difficulty breathing, or minor stomach discomfort. These early signs could be easily attributed to wedding day anxiety and nerves. As the minutes passed, Elena started to feel increasing anxiety. Bridget seemed entirely normal, chatting enthusiastically with well-wishers and laughing at her new husband's comments. Her cheeks remained flushed with happiness. Her breathing was steady, and she showed absolutely no sign of distress. 25 minutes after drinking the poisoned wine, Bridget was still greeting guests with undiminished energy. Eleanor felt the first wave of genuine panic. Had she miscalculated the amount? Was the compound she obtained somehow ineffective? Or was this Irish girl blessed with an exceptionally strong constitution that could resist the poison's impact? The wedding party began moving toward the Piton mansion for the reception breakfast. Elena walked alongside Father Matthews, engaging in polite conversation while internally screaming with frustration. Her meticulously planned murder was failing, and she had no alternative strategy to deal with this disastrous outcome. At the mansion, the guests gathered in the main drawing room and the adjacent dining room, which had been adorned with more autumn flowers and set with Elena's finest china and crystal. A luxurious breakfast feast awaited the party: fresh oysters from Long Island Sound, roasted fowl, delicate pastries, and several bottles of champagne for toasting the newlyweds. Eleanor performed her duties as hostess with mounting desperation. 45 minutes had passed since Bridget consumed the arsenic, yet the young woman continued to appear perfectly healthy. She had removed her gloves and was graciously accepting compliments from Hartford's social elite with remarkable composure, showing no hint of the symptoms Elena had expected by now. "Mrs. Peaton," said Mrs. Harrison Fitzgerald, approaching with a glass of champagne, "you must be so proud. The service was lovely, and your new daughter-in-law is absolutely charming, much more refined than one would expect from her background." Elena forced a smile. "Yes, Bridget is a lovely girl. We are very pleased with William's choice." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. If the poison failed, she would be forced to accept this Irish peasant as her daughter-in-law permanently. The O'Sullivan family would become a part of the Piton legacy, their Catholic customs and immigrant ties eternally linked to Elena's carefully constructed reputation. Just when we thought we had seen it all, the horror in Hartford intensifies. If this narrative sends shivers down your spine, please share this video with a friend who appreciates grim mysteries. Hit the like button to support our material, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss future stories like this. Let's find out together what happens next. As the breakfast went on, Elena found herself observing Bridget with a focused intensity. The young woman moved through the room with William, accepting good wishes and engaging in lively conversations about their honeymoon to New York City. Her appetite seemed normal. She ate small portions of the food with evident pleasure and drank 2 glasses of champagne without any noticeable ill effects. 1 hour after the poisoning, Bridget displayed no symptoms whatsoever. Eleanor excused herself from the reception and retreated to her private study, slamming the door shut with poorly concealed force. She had gambled everything on this scheme, and it was failing disastrously. The arsenic oxide was either ineffective or insufficient to achieve its goal. But as Eleanor paced the length of her study, trying to formulate a fallback plan, she heard an uproar from the drawing room. Voices were raised in alarm, and someone was loudly demanding that Dr. Harrison be summoned immediately. Elena's heart surged with renewed hope. Perhaps the poison was simply slower to act than her research had suggested. She composed her features into an expression of maternal concern and quickly returned to the reception. What she discovered exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Bridget was sitting in Elena's finest wingback chair, her face pale and drawn. She was breathing quickly and clutching her stomach with one hand, while William knelt beside her, looking frantic with worry. "I don't understand what's happening," Bridget was saying in a weak voice. "I felt perfectly well just moments ago, and then suddenly—" "What are her symptoms?" asked Dr. Harrison, who was among the wedding guests and immediately responded to the call. "Stomach pain, nausea, and difficulty breathing," William replied, his voice strained with anxiety. "She says she feels a burning sensation in her throat." Dr. Harrison, a respected physician in his 60s who had served Hartford's elite families for decades, immediately began to examine Bridget. He checked her pulse, looked into her eyes, and asked detailed questions about the onset and progression of her symptoms. Elena moved closer, pretending maternal anxiety while inwardly celebrating the poison's delayed but seemingly successful action. "Dr. Harrison, is there anything we can do? Should we take her upstairs where she might be more comfortable?" "No, don't move her yet," the doctor replied gravely. "Mrs. Petton, I need you to immediately send someone to my office for my medical bag, and have your cook prepare a strong mixture of salt water, as much as the patient can manage to drink." As Elena sent servants on these errands, she noticed Bridget's condition deteriorating rapidly. The young woman's breathing was becoming labored and beads of sweat dotted her forehead despite the cool October air. Her hands trembled as she gripped the arms of the chair, and when she tried to speak, her voice was barely a whisper. "The wine," Bridget managed to articulate, looking directly at Eleanor with unnaturally bright eyes. "The wine at the church. It tasted strange." Elena's blood ran cold. Had Bridget somehow detected the presence of the poison? Or was this just the confused delirium of someone affected by arsenic toxicity? "What do you mean, dear?" Elena asked, keeping her voice level. "The wine was from our best vintage. Perhaps you are simply overwhelmed by all the excitement of the day." But Dr. Harrison had become completely still at Bridget's words. He looked up sharply, his experienced eyes darting from the bride to Eleanor and back again. "Mrs. Petton," he said cautiously, "exactly what wine was served during the ceremony?" "French vintage from our private supplier," Elena responded. "The same wine we have served at family celebrations for years." "Surely you don't suspect—" "I suspect," Dr. Harrison interrupted, "that we may be dealing with something far more serious than wedding day anxiety." He turned to William, who was holding Bridget's hand and whispering comfort. "Mr. Petton, I need you to dispatch someone to Trinity Church immediately. Have them bring back the chalice that was used for the wine blessing, and any remaining wine from the bottle that was opened for the ceremony." Eleanor felt panic surge in her chest. If Dr. Harrison examined the chalice and discovered traces of arsenic, her carefully constructed plan would completely unravel. She had to prevent that examination at any cost. "Doctor, surely you are being overly cautious," she argued. "The poor child is simply overwhelmed. Perhaps if we moved her to a quiet room—" "Mrs. Petton," Dr. Harrison said with calm authority, "I have been practicing medicine for 37 years. I have seen wedding day nerves, and I have seen food poisoning, and I have seen the effects of various toxic substances. This young woman's symptoms are consistent with cynical poisoning." The words landed in the drawing room like stones in calm water, creating shock and disbelief among the assembled guests. Several women audibly gasped, while the men moved closer to better hear Dr. Harrison's diagnosis. William's face turned white. "Poison? That's impossible." How could Bridget have been poisoned? She has eaten and drunk nothing that wasn't served to everyone else. Not everyone else drank from the ceremonial chalice, Dr. Harrison pointed out grimly. "Only the bride and groom shared that wine." "And you, Mr. Petton, show no symptoms of distress." Elena realized with mounting horror that the doctor was systematically dismissing other potential sources of poison, inevitably focusing on the one moment when Bridget had consumed something different from the other guests. Her mind raced frantically, seeking a way to divert suspicion. "Perhaps the arsenic came from somewhere else entirely," she suggested desperately. "These old houses sometimes have lead pipes or other sources of contamination." But even as she spoke, Elena could see that Dr. Harrison was unconvinced. His sharp eyes were studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Beneath his professional exterior, she sensed a growing suspicion that chilled her to the core. Meanwhile, Bridget's condition continued to deteriorate. Her breathing had become increasingly strained, and she was now struggling to stay conscious. The bright color in her cheeks had vanished, replaced by an alarming paleness, and when she tried to speak, only incoherent whispers emerged. "We need to get her to my office immediately," Dr. Harrison declared. "Mr. Petton, can your carriage accommodate a stretcher? Time is critical if we are going to save her life." The word save struck Elena like a physical blow. She had assumed that once the arsenic took effect, Bridget's death would be swift and irreversible. The possibility that medical intervention might prevent the poison from completing its work had never occurred to her. As William arranged transport to Dr. Harrison's office, Elena found herself caught between the frantic hope that Bridget would die before receiving medical help and the mounting terror that the young woman might survive to identify her poisoner. If Bridget lived and if Dr. Harrison's suspicions continued, Elena could face charges of attempted murder. The idea of being prosecuted before Hartford's legal system, of having her reputation ruined and her freedom confiscated, filled Eleanor with a more intense panic than anything she had ever experienced. Everything she had worked toward, everything she had sacrificed to obtain would be permanently lost. The trip to Dr. Harrison's office was undertaken in grim silence, with Bridget's condition worsening further during the short carriage ride. By the time they arrived at the doctor's practice on Main Street, she was barely conscious, and her breathing had become so shallow that William feared she might die before treatment. Dr. Harrison's office occupied the ground floor of a substantial brick building, featuring examination rooms, a small surgical area, and a dispensary where he prepared medications for his patients. Elena had visited the office routinely over the years for minor health issues, but she had never seen it transformed into the site of desperate medical intervention that now greeted them. The doctor immediately began administering procedures aimed at counteracting arsenic poisoning. He forced salt water down Bridget's throat to induce vomiting, hoping to expel any poison remaining in her stomach. When this proved insufficient, he prepared a mixture of milk and egg whites, explaining to William that these substances might help absorb toxins in the digestive system. Elena watched these efforts with mounting anxiety. Every treatment Dr. Harrison administered increased the possibility that Bridget might survive, and survival meant exposure for Elena. She found herself in the horrifying position of wishing for a young woman's death, while maintaining the facade of a concerned mother-in-law. "Mr. Peaton," Dr. Harrison said during a brief pause in his treatments, "I sent my assistant to Trinity Church to retrieve the ceremonial chalice. He should return shortly with evidence that will help us determine exactly how your wife was poisoned." Elena's hands involuntarily clenched at her sides. The chalice would contain residual traces of arsenic that would confirm Dr. Harrison's diagnosis beyond all doubt. Once he possessed physical evidence of poisoning, his investigation would naturally concentrate on who had access to the wine and the opportunity to administer the toxin. The assistant returned 20 minutes later carrying the silver chalice wrapped in a clean cloth, along with the bottle that had held the ceremonial wine. Dr. Harrison carefully examined both items using chemical tests that Elena hadn't known existed. "As I suspected," he grimly announced, "there are distinct traces of arsenic compounds in this chalice, and the remaining wine shows similar contamination. This was not accidental poisoning. Someone deliberately added a significant amount of arsenic to the wine that was served to the bride." William stared at the doctor in shock. "You're saying someone tried to murder my wife? But who would do such a thing? Bridget has no enemies in Hartford." Dr. Harrison's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the faces of everyone present. When his gaze rested on Elena, she felt as though he could see directly into her guilty soul. "The question," Dr. Harrison said carefully, "is who had access to the ceremonial wine between the time it was prepared and the time it was consumed." Elena forced herself to speak calmly. "Surely any number of people could have tampered with the wine: church staff, members of the wedding party, even random individuals who might have entered the building." "Perhaps," Dr. Harrison countered. "But arsenic oxide is not a common substance. Obtaining it would require specialized knowledge and connections to chemical suppliers. This was not a crime of opportunity. It required careful planning and deliberate preparation." The net was closing around Eleanor with terrifying speed. Dr. Harrison's systematic approach to the investigation was methodically eliminating alternative explanations and focusing attention on those who possessed both the motive and the means for the crime. At that precise moment, Bridget stirred on the examination table where she had been lying unconscious for nearly an hour. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked around the room with clear confusion and distress. "William," she whispered weakly, "what happened?" "Where am I?" "You're at Dr. Harrison's office," William replied, gently taking her hand. "You've been very ill, but you are going to be all right now." Bridget's gaze moved around the room until it settled on Elena. For a long moment the two women looked directly at each other, and Elena saw something in the young woman's eyes that chilled her to the bone. "I remember now," Bridget said softly. "The wine. There was something wrong with the wine." Dr. Harrison leaned forward intently. What do you remember about the wine, Mrs. Peyton? It had a strange taste, not bitter exactly, but different. And I remember seeing... Bridget paused, her brow furrowing with the effort of recollection. I remember seeing someone near the chalice during Father Matthew's blessing, someone who shouldn't have been there. Eleanor felt the walls of the room closing in around her. Bridget's memory was returning, and with it would come the identification that would destroy Elena's life forever. Who did you see, dear? Dr. Harrison asked gently. Bridget's eyes moved to Elena again, and this time there was no confusion in her gaze. Mrs. Petton, I saw her stirring something into the wine while Father Matthews was speaking to the congregation. The accusation landed in the room like an explosion. William stared at his mother in shock and disbelief while Dr. Harrison nodded somberly, as if his suspicions were confirmed. Mother, William said, his voice barely a whisper, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't attempt to murder my wife. Elena felt the last remnants of her carefully constructed composure shatter. The deception was over. The truth had emerged, and there was no longer any reason to maintain the pretense of innocence. She would have ruined everything, Elena stated quietly, her voice carrying a strange sense of relief at finally confessing the truth. Your social standing, the family reputation, our financial stability, everything we have labored for would have been lost to an Irish immigrant who charmed you with her foreign allure. William recoiled from his mother as though she had physically struck him. You tried to kill the woman I love because of her heritage? I attempted to save you from making the biggest error of your life, Elena retorted with growing defiance. That girl will drag the Peyton name through the muck of Irish politics and Catholic dogma. Your children would have been social pariahs, neither accepted by respectable society nor welcomed by the immigrant community, who would view them as traitors. Those children would have been your grandchildren, William said, his voice cracking with emotion. They would have been half-Irish mongrels with divided loyalties and no place in respectable society. Elena snapped. I would sooner see the Peyton lineage end entirely than watch it be contaminated by foreign blood and alien customs. Dr. Harrison had listened to this exchange with professional detachment, but now he stepped forward with quiet authority. Mrs. Peyton, I regret that I have no option but to notify the Hartford Constabulary about the events that have taken place here. You have admitted to attempted murder in the presence of several witnesses. Elena laughed bitterly. Do you truly believe the authorities will prosecute a respected Hartford matriarch for trying to shield her family from immigrant corruption? Half the men on the city council share my fears about the Irish problem. Perhaps, Dr. Harrison replied, but they also understand that poisoning is a serious felony, regardless of the perpetrator's social standing. The law applies to everyone, Mrs. Peyton, even wealthy widows who feel their biases justify attempted murder. The trial of Elena Piton commenced on November 20th, 1841, in Hartford Superior Court. The case garnered unprecedented attention throughout Connecticut and beyond, with newspapers from Boston to New York reporting on every detail of the proceedings. The sight of a prominent society matron accused of poisoning her son's Irish bride captivated the public imagination in a way that highlighted the deep social tensions of the era. Judge Samuel Huntington, himself a member of Hartford's established elite, oversaw the trial with meticulous adherence to legal procedure. Despite his personal acquaintance with Elena and some shared social concerns, he could not ignore the overwhelming evidence against her. Dr. Harrison's testimony regarding the arsenic poisoning was substantiated by chemical analysis, Bridget's eyewitness identification, and Elena's explicit confession in the doctor's office. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Charles Morgan, presented the case as a calculated murder attempt motivated by social prejudice and financial avarice. The defendant, Morgan informed the jury, placed her own narrow concerns about social status above the life of an innocent young woman whose only crime was falling in love with the defendant's son. Elena's defense counsel, Hartford's most esteemed criminal attorney, argued that she had acted under extreme emotional distress triggered by her son's unsuitable marriage choice. He sought to portray Elena as a devoted mother, driven to temporary madness by the prospect of her family's social ruin. The strategy was a complete failure. the careful planning required to acquire arsenic oxide, the precise timing of the poisoning during the wedding ceremony, and Elena's calculated demeanor, both before and after the crime, demonstrated premeditation that nullified any claim of temporary insanity. Bridget's testimony proved especially damaging to Elena's defense. The young woman had fully recovered from the arsenic poisoning and spoke with quiet dignity about the events of her wedding day. Her obvious intelligence and refinement made a powerful impression on the jury, undermining Elena's depiction of her as an inappropriate immigrant. "I hold no personal malice toward Mrs. Peaton," Bridget stated to the court. "I understand that she acted out of love for her son, even though that love was expressed through terrible means, but I cannot forget that she attempted to kill me because she believed my Irish heritage made me unworthy of her family." William's testimony was the most emotionally shattering moment of the trial. He spoke of his affection for both his mother and his wife, his horror at discovering Elena's crime, and his determination to ensure that justice was served regardless of familial ties. "My mother taught me to value honor, integrity, and moral courage," he told the court. "Those same principles now compel me to testify truthfully about her actions, no matter how painful that truth may be." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on charges of attempted murder. Judge Huntington sentenced Elena to 15 years in the Connecticut State Prison, noting that her social standing and previous good character had been considered when setting the length of her incarceration. "The defendant's crime strikes at the core of civilized society," Judge Huntington declared during sentencing. "When prejudice and social ambition lead to attempted murder, the law must respond with appropriate severity to protect all citizens, irrespective of their background or origin." Eleanor received the sentence with the same composure she had shown throughout the trial. She displayed no emotion as the court officers escorted her away to begin her imprisonment, though observers noted that she avoided looking at William and Bridget as she exited the courtroom. The Peaton family's social standing in Hartford never recovered from the scandal. William found himself excluded by many of the families who had once welcomed him, though a few progressive members of the community offered support to him and Bridget. They relocated to Boston shortly after the trial, where William established a successful law practice, and they raised 3 children who grew up to be distinguished citizens of Massachusetts. Bridget proved to be everything William believed her to be: intelligent, graceful, and dedicated to their family's well-being. She became involved in charitable organizations that assisted Irish immigrants, using her social position to bridge the divide between established American families and newcomers seeking better lives. Elena served 12 years of her sentence before being released for good behavior in 1853. She returned to Hartford a broken woman, her fortune significantly diminished by legal fees and the costs of her imprisonment. She quietly resided in a humble boarding house until her passing in 1858, having never reconciled with William or met her grandchildren. The silver chalice employed in the poisoning was later melted down by Trinity Church, and the metal was donated to a relief fund for Irish immigrants. Father Matthews, profoundly disturbed by the desecration of the sacred rite that occurred under his watch, implemented new protocols for wedding preparations, ensuring multiple individuals were present whenever ceremonial items were being handled. The case of Elena Peaton became a cautionary tale recounted across New England, regarding the perils of unbridled prejudice and social ambition. Legal scholars cited it as a prime example of how even the most privileged members of society remained accountable to the rule of law when perpetrating serious crimes. Yet, perhaps the most enduring consequence of the tragedy was its effect on Hartford's societal attitudes toward Irish immigrants and other newcomers to American life. The blatant injustice of Elena's attempt to murder Bridget, solely because of her heritage, compelled many long-established families to critically examine their own biases and assumptions. Dr. Harrison, whose swift intervention and medical expertise had preserved Bridget's life, became an outspoken advocate for treating all patients with equal care, irrespective of their social origins. His testimony during the trial had demonstrated the importance of employing scientific methods in criminal investigations, thereby helping to establish forensic medicine as an indispensable tool for law enforcement. The poisoned chalice case, as newspapers termed it, remained a subject of conversation in Hartford for decades following the trial's conclusion. Parents used Elena's story to caution their children about the corrosive effects of hatred and prejudice, while legal professionals studied the case as an instance of how social tensions could escalate into violent crime. In 1865, 24 years after the poisoning, William Peaton returned to Hartford for the first time since the trial. He was accompanied by Bridget and their 3 children, coming to visit his father's grave and show his family the city of his upbringing. Older residents who recalled the scandal were struck by the obvious happiness and professional success of the couple whose marriage had almost ended in murder. Bridget, now a mature woman of 43 with strands of gray in her auburn hair, stood beside her husband at Jonathan Peaton's gravestone. She had never publicly discussed forgiving Elena, but those who observed her silent prayer at the cemetery understood that she had achieved peace regarding the traumatic events of her wedding day. The Hartford Courant, which had extensively covered the original trial, published a brief report of the family's visit. The final sentence of that article encapsulated the ultimate irony of Eleanor's crime. The union that was nearly destroyed by poison has instead blossomed into one of New England's most respected families, proving that love and character triumph over prejudice and hatred. This mystery illustrates how fear and prejudice can drive even respectable people to commit unthinkable actions, and how the moral courage to uphold justice can overcome even the deepest societal divisions. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe that social tensions could still motivate someone to such desperate measures today? Feel free to leave your comment below and share your reflections on Eleanor's motives and eventual fate. If you enjoyed this narrative and desire more historical mysteries like it, please subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share with someone who appreciates dark stories from America's past. We'll see you in the next video, where we will explore another forgotten chapter of our nation's hidden history.